Welcome to CISO Interviews, where Affinia hosts cybersecurity executives sharing career advice, actionable insights, and tips so that you can enhance your career and succeed as well.
Jamey, so good to see you again. It's been a minute. I know you've been traveling, and I'm glad I caught you. Well, you were taking a little bit break from all those various trips. It's a crazy world out there. I know after Black Hat, so many follow-ups, so many meetings. It's time goes by so quickly. But I appreciate you taking time for this, and specifically for this conversation, because I think the main topic, which is what to do when you're embarking on this journey to look for the next CISO role, while you still have a CISO position, but you're starting to think about the next role. What some of the mistakes people make, what some of the strategies you suggest, what some of the tactics you see work in the field. Most importantly, we just want to make sure that people are calibrated properly in terms of their expectations so they don't waste time and they're not disappointed in the end. But picture someone who is currently employed as a CISO, but they know that 6 months from now, 12 months from now, that position will come to an end. Either there is an acquisition in the works, or divestiture, or just change in strategy, or but they just had a conversation and they found out that their position will be cut in 6 months' time. What are the top 3 things people should focus on within that time frame to set them up for success?
Well, I think I'm going to answer your question. I'm going to add a little maybe additional twist to it, is that my advice to any executive, and specifically, we're talking about information security professionals, is the mantra of the time to build your network and your brand is well before you think you might even need it. So before you even may be potentially in a situation where, for legitimate reasons beyond your own control, like you said, whether your company's being acquired or restructuring, whatever it may be, that's not the time when you want to be scrambling to think about, what does my resume look like? How am I branding myself? How am I building a presence in the market, as opposed to just being heads down, doing a good job and hoping that people will recognize that on their own and things will take care of themselves. That's you might get lucky occasionally, but that's frankly pretty fanciful thinking. Mm-hmm. So first and foremost is, even if now today you are very happy where you are, you should always be mindful of the fact that no one's going to manage your own career for your career other than yourself, really, in the way that's most I would say beneficial to you. And how do you do that? How does it manifest itself? I think first and foremost is doing a very good job of what you do. I think it's table stakes. Is you want to build a very good resume, and you want to build a brand with people who know you. And who are those people? It's the people you've worked for and with, and people who've worked for you. Mm-hmm. Especially if we get to the point, if you get to the point where you have not landed a new role before you end up being on the beach, as we refer to it, the strength of legitimate and I'd say very credible references, that's very powerful, especially if you are in a position where, hey, I'm looking for my next role. Some people might call you a job seeker, right, wrong, or indifferent. That can be a label that's put upon you. Mm-hmm. And if you're in a hyper competitive situation, well, then those who are gainfully employed may have a leg up on you. Mm-hmm. So, having a very strong resume and having people who will speak on your behalf as strong references legitimately. Those could be current or former colleagues. It could be your peers in the market. It could be. One thing I find a lot of times is that I very much respect the opinion of a CISO's peer group. Mm-hmm. What do they think of this person? How well do they carry themselves? Are they is there weight behind what they're saying? Are they really good at what they do? So that to me is the first thing is to really build a good, legitimate resume and references that you can lean upon. Because the resume is great, but it's really at the end of the day when I'm interviewing candidates and considering them or any hiring organization, we're all storytellers. They want to know what the story is and how can that be corroborated and supported by others who have credible knowledge of your capabilities. So that to me is the starting point.
Certainly. Well, and so to double click and to address separately the building the network and building the brand. So building the network, and probably before that, the question that I would have, is it true that only a certain percentage of searches go through executive search, searches for CISOs?
Absolutely. Yeah.
A large portion of them are sourced by the company without assistance of an executive search organization.
So to answer that question, the short answer is yes. I don't have any hard data as to what the percentages are, and I think it ebbs and flows. And I think as the role has become more and more prominent in the market, even compared to, say, 10 plus years ago, where it was frankly a bit of a foreign concept to a lot of organizations, this notion of having a CISO. What is it, let alone do we want someone with that title? I think my experience was, and my colleague, my compatriots and I in the market probably benefited from this, is where there's uncertainty and you don't understand the role itself very well, or the market for that talent. You're probably better served to go to an expert who has the repetitions doing it well. The novelty has worn off a little bit now, and more organizations are, I think, familiar with what a CISO is, what good looks like. So yeah, some of our stiffest competition as executive recruiters is, we call it the DIY, the do-it-yourself. So yeah. So, and what does that mean for you as a CISO? Well, that means you need to build your brand and market presence to the extent you're comfortable doing that with a broader audience than just executive recruiters. We are one pillar of that platform.
Which is actually exactly what I was getting at, because let's say, and also I don't know exactly what the percentage is. Let's say 20%, 30% of placements go through executive search firms. So if I'm a CISO, it makes a lot of sense to have a conversation with someone like you well in advance and very relaxed manner, and I'll catch you at RSA with Black Hat and say, hey, just don't put my name in the hat. This is who I, is like literally 5-second conversation about who I am, what my brand is, and what I'm looking for, and that so that if a search comes up that fits those parameters, I'll be in the running. So, but then from the comment that you made about building the network, if you're looking at the remainder of the placements, the 70-80% of the placements that the do-it-yourself group, I imagine some of them are filled by internal candidates. So someone who was a deputy CISO and now they're stepping up to the CISO role.
I think that's increasing compared to even 24 months ago.
And interestingly enough, a separate conversation, often people get frustrated. They apply to CISO roles, CISO jobs on LinkedIn and don't hear anything, not realizing that this was just done as a compliance checkbox to be checked. They already had someone internally tapped on the shoulder for that particular role, and they're only posting on LinkedIn just so that for appearances' sake only. And again, it's probably maybe a little bit of an insider baseball, but I hear some of those stories, and it's certainly frustrating. But I think it's important to calibrate expectations that some of those things can be happening. But I guess the real question that I'm driving at, knowing that 70-80% of the placements are done by do-it-yourself crowd, who do I build that network with? Is it the board of the different organizations? Is it the IT CIOs and CTOs of the various organizations that I think may be a good fit? Is it the executive recruiters internally in those organizations? Is it the incumbents who may be a little bit more junior in the organization but know of those roles becoming available? All the above? Like, what's your advice?
This episode is brought to you by Afinia, a community where 2,000 CISOs and other senior executives network, learn, and succeed together. To apply for your complimentary membership, please visit www.affinia.com or click the link in the show notes. Now, back to the show.
That's a very good question. I think it's the notion of building a network that's robust is probably not that realistic, depending upon how narrow of a field do you want to focus on. So let's just say hypothetically, you're only going to work for large financial institutions in New York. Well, then all of a sudden you have a much more manageable universe of people you want to try to network into and get on their radar. But if you're reasonably agnostic from an industry perspective or a geography or company size, well, then frankly becomes unmanageable. To actually go build those networks, it's more, in my view, how do you build your presence and your brand such that people are more likely to identify you through their networking and their online research? So that could be, obviously your LinkedIn profile. It could be other ways that you're out there seen as a thought leader, whether it is a panelist on a hot topic at RSA or Black Hat or anything else like that, or even some thought leadership out there. Those are ways that you can be seen beyond just your LinkedIn profile. Another thing you'd mentioned is the mentors and peers. So it's not unusual in my experience, and it doesn't benefit me personally necessarily when it happens, but the CISO community, I've found one thing I like about it is there is a sense of we're all in this together. They want to help each other out. They're all fighting the good fight. And sometimes the DIY, if I could use that phrase again, has been not so much the internal recruiting team, but the outgoing CISO is like, well, I've got 5 to 10 of my peers I think are really good that you might reach out to. And they preemptively provide them as a starting point for the internal recruiting team. And so probably of those that you've mentioned, Misha, where I would think it would be powerful to be building that network so you get on the radar, it's your peer group. Assuming that, even if there may be an internal successor who's identified, they may want to see what else the market will bear externally. Well, then, assuming that CISO is leaving on good terms, may not always be the case, but if they have that credibility and they have the ear of the internal team, those warm referrals and recommendations go a long way. And so to the extent any of that would be feasible, as you mentioned, especially if you're more open broadly from an industry or geography perspective, that's where I would spend time to build a network and credibility is with your peer group personally. Because to go out and get to be on the radar of all the talent acquisition people and all the heads of HR and all the CIOs and all the board members, it's just, that's just not
I
realistic.
understand. No, that's why I was asking, because I wanted to understand from those different constituencies which one will be more productive. And I guess that it's more of a comment, rather than a question. I think a lot of people are frustrated with networking because they go to a networking event and they go into a room and they meet all those people and they come empty-handed, so to speak, because their intent is, what can those people do for me? And the way I understand networking is how I can help my peers, my group succeed. And for every unit of value given, you need to worry about being transactional. It's about helping other people. I think most people miss that part. That networking is about what I can do for you.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Misha. When I read a book a few years ago by a guy named Adam Grant called Give and Take, and I've mentioned it to a few people before, and some really powerful messaging in there. And I think one of the premises, similar to what you just said, is that those who tend to go in with a very transactional mindset may be less likely to get the long-term benefits of what they're seeking. And it sounds a little Pollyanna, and I think you have to maybe keep the faith that it'll work, is that if you go into it almost more being given than you are of taking, of your time, your insights, and your relationships or otherwise, in the end, there's a higher chance it'll work out for you. And so that's why I think sometimes, if you think about it in a different way, networking might be a 4-letter word to you. It's like, well, I didn't get anything out of that. And I guess it's almost similar to that old adage of, I mean, I have the numbers right, but yeah, at the end of the day, maybe 50% of your marketing budget and efforts will work, but you just don't know which 50% they are. Same with your networking. You just don't know. If you try to tie this to that, you're probably going to get frustrated.
Certainly. And I guess it's kind of all ties back to, from the value perspective, who do I help? Is it the peer group? Is it the IT of some of those companies that potentially maybe, do I try to get, find out a way to build a relationship with some of the board members of some of those organizations?
Yeah, well, Misha, what I'd tell you is a lot of times some of the best candidates that we place are those who we reach out, and we have a lot of relationships, but you can never know everybody. You can never know the next generation of talent. And not infrequently, our successful candidate or our finalist candidates, who maybe subsequently will be a finalist candidate placement later, are not people we cold call. They're people that I reach out, and someone will say, well, I'm not interested. Timing's not right, but you should call Misha. The guy's great. It would not have been on our radar, and maybe wasn't actively looking, but then we knock on their door on something that they're least expecting, and next thing you know, it's a great opportunity that's presented itself. Mm-hmm. So that's how that stuff, I think, just happens organically over time. Is you build that reputation, people remember that, and then your name will be top of mind when they have a recommendation for something if it's not for them.
So it sounds like there is serendipity involved in the process, and all you have to do is increase the surface area for luck to happen.
Meaning, it's not all you have to do, but it'll go a long way.
Right. Yeah. Well, right. But again, build it in advance, not when you need it, and focus on giving, and focus on being strategic about how you invest your time, obviously, because you only have so much of it. But focus on giving so that the surface area, the number of people who can send things your way, relevant people in relevant positions is larger.
Kind of corny way to say it, but to say this is one instance where you want your attack surface to be bigger.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. I call it surface area, but attack surface is good enough. And the flip side of what you mentioned, the building the brand. And you mentioned a few things. You mentioned the resume. You mentioned LinkedIn. I think a lot of things that people think of as a brand is how they're perceived by the community based on what conferences they attend, what panels they speak on, what they post on LinkedIn. And it's a range. And I see some people, it seems like all they do is go to conferences, and all they do is they get celebrated as the CISO of the year by some, yet another association. And then you look at their profile, and they haven't been a real CISO for 10 years. It's advisory roles and board memberships and advising startups and whatnot. So it's certainly, and it's for someone who lives on LinkedIn, it's kind of obvious. People play different games, but in terms of this brand building, what do you suggest people do? So I hear an opinion that you want to be best in class, best in the world, and one specific thing. Some people say, well, you want to be not necessarily a jack of all trades, but be kind of a little bit more of a Swiss Army knife. As far as the personal branding is concerned, if someone is looking for a job 12 months from now, what should they focus on?
This episode is brought to you by Athenia, a community where 2,000 CISOs and other senior executives network, learn, and succeed together. To apply for your complimentary membership, please visit www.athenia.com or click the link in the show notes. Now, back to the show.
I would say, like a lot of things in life, there's moderation and balance. I think that if you're overexposure can be a bit much. It might, you might beg the question, is it all about self-promotion and what are they actually doing their job? I mean, I'm being facetious in the, an extreme there. Ultimately, I continue to come back to, I think that stuff is some of that stuff can be good in doses. And that's another way for someone to get on my radar, but that's not going to be, for me at least, the reason I do or don't like present them to a client. And it's another data point. It's another piece to the puzzle. I think ultimately it would come back to, for me at least, how do they reference with people who really know them, right? I mean, that's good. That's some sort of demonstration of their knowledge and contribution to the community, if you want to put it that way. But if it's all flash, but it's not like, hey, there's some substance behind it. I think this is a community where the peer group will be able to sift through that and they'll know. And I think I put a lot more stock in that, generally speaking, than I do how many panels have they done and how much have they done. So I just think it's there's no right or wrong answer. I personally, my view is that it can be additive, but I just would strike a balance of not overdoing it and just be mindful that I think those who are really doing their diligence are going to like say, that's great, but let's get to the heart of who are you? How do you get things done? What have you done? And what do others say to corroborate that?
So it's add sizzle, but you still need the steak.
Yeah. I mean, yes. If you want to narrow that down to some, yes, that's a much more efficient way of saying that. Yeah.
Other than, so you mentioned investing in your network and building the network before you need it, focusing on figuring out what personal brand you're putting out there. Other than that, you have 12 months to go. What is there anything else people should think about or focus on?
I just think once you speak with people so they can be helpful, have a good sense of what you want to do and maybe more importantly, what you don't want to do, what's not of interest. So you don't find yourself boiling the ocean or they're not sure how to be helpful to you to point you in the right direction. Know what your narrative and your story are as you try to position yourself for opportunities. We haven't really talked about it, but I think it goes without saying, even though maybe we do 10 to 20% of searches, you should absolutely foster good relationships with multiple retained executive recruiters. Because at the end of the day, we each, this is an oversimplification, but say there's 5 people that do information security at one firm, you'd be better off knowing one person at 5 firms than 5 people at one firm. Just because once again,
5 people run the same searches probably.
Yeah, not they're going to have that client base, but yeah, you just expand your attack surface if you get to know more and more people and find ways to build those relationships. And that means there's a lot of ways you can do that. One is to discreetly let them know you're open to opportunities. The give and take piece, like legitimately, if there's people that you want to help or get to know, we always value warm leads or really strong referrals and references for others. Because as I've mentioned before, that's one of the ways we find some of our best candidates. And in the end, that could be a net benefit to you. Maybe one of those opportunities will end up being the right one for you rather than someone you prefer.
And while we're in this subject, Jamey, what's because I know sometimes there's frustration on the CISO side because they feel that executive search firms need to present them with 5 opportunities and they will just pick one that suits their needs. And I know sometimes you would get frustrated that people's expectations are unrealistic about different things, even your availability. So as a public service announcement, what's the best way to reach out to you?
The best way I would describe it is think of us as I'm dating myself a little bit here, but anyone who saw the movie Jerry Maguire, we're not Jerry Maguire. We represent the team. I always want to get to know the talent for sure, but at any given time, it ebbs and flows. I only have certain roles that my team are working on, and for each one of those, you can imagine our clients engaging us. They've got some pretty specific parameters. So just because I may not have something for you right now, or I don't engage you, doesn't mean I don't think you're not talented. It's just that I don't want to waste your time because my client is very specific about what they want.
And with this in mind, is they just a simple email? Hey, I'm currently at this particular role, but I'll be looking. This is who I am. This is what I'm looking for. Will that be sufficient to get into your universe of potential clients for future mandates?
And sometimes what I'll do when I have time, I'll just do a quick 15-minute call, send my Calendly, and be like, hey, what do you got? Okay, that's all I need to know for now. I'm not going to do a deep dive. That will come with the appropriate time. And then I would say, find a way to be respectfully persistent. I like to use that phrase. Reach out every, couple of months, 6 to 8 weeks. Every week's way too often. 6 months is probably not quite enough. Maybe quarterly or once every couple of months. That way, and we're all busy. You stay top of mind. Oh, hey, Misha, great to hear from you. Yeah, you know what? I'm glad you reached out. That reminds me, we're about to pick up a search here or there. I feel like that's a reasonably good cadence. Just to check in and say, hey, staying on your radar. Just want to hear if you've got anything going on. And I think that's a good way to go about it.
Totally. I know we're coming up on time, Jamey. Last question. And it's more around expectations, because I think a big source of frustration is when people get surprised, and some of those surprises about unrealistic expectations about how long the search is going to take. And I know someone who's a CISO, probably executive level, way into their career, maybe they have a family, have responsibilities. What should people expect realistically of how long the search might take, and how much in terms of financial resources they need to have stashed to carry them through until they get a new job?
Well, I mean, our average days to close is 90 days, but that's pretty quick. You should assume that if you're engaged in an executive search, looking at multiple opportunities, you should budget at least 3 to 6 months at a minimum. And that's assuming everything goes smoothly.
And that's from a client perspective, but from a CISO perspective, if I know
even
that...
from a CISO, depends. I mean, it depends on the situation, and these things ebb and flow. And if you're in a competitive search process, that's how long it will take.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think, my experience has been, and there's a book called Rites of Passage I recommend to people, is however much time you think it's going to take, add 50 to 100%. That way you won't be frustrated. I think if the executive level, especially if higher compensation levels, the number of roles that make sense are just going to be way more limited. So you should budget in your mind a fair amount of time, just so you don't get too frustrated or desperate.
For sure.
I mean, if you're on a tight budget and all of a sudden you're like, wow, I need to start bringing in some income. You might feel a little bit more anxious when that time comes.
And that's what I want to this frustration on people to avoid, because it's people start making suboptimal choices if they feel under pressure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yep. Jamey, this was incredible. Thank you so much. Super productive and super informative. I hope we'll get to do it again.
Sounds good. Thanks, Misha.
If you liked this episode, please subscribe to this channel and visit Afinia.com for more information about your complimentary membership, or click the link in the show notes.